The Norse religion that everybody thinks they know about is in fact not truly a religion. It is the modern Norwegian mythology that was based primarily on older stories that were then rewritten after Christianization. It was a way to maintain links to the past, while at the same time no longer worshipping false idols and bringing upon the ire of the Christians and their new, more powerful god. Many of these stories are continued to be used to either explain the old gods, talk about some of the newer invented gods, or explain natural phenomenon in a way that is easy for the peasantry to understand, as these date from the early 12th century to into the 15th century, and science was lacking at best in the northern climes. Many of the stories that we have are rima, or literally a rhyme, rhymer in plural. They're epic poems dating from the early 14th century, and were written to be easy to read and simple in storytelling so that the peasantry could use them as a word of mouth sort of transmission of ideas. My favorite of these is the Lokror. It's dated to the early 14th century. It's a myth that's also preserved in the 13th century prose Edda Gylfaginning. The Lokror is a more detailed storytelling of the travels of Thor and Loki as they go on a little trip. Here now is that story. So one day, Thor gets it in his mind that he wants to go meet Loki's namesake, Utgard Loki. And he goes and wanders and finds Loki and says, hey, let's go meet this guy. Loki is clever and wise, and is reluctant, saying that Utgard Loki is a fearsome troll, and in the Norse times, trolls meant giant. Thor tells Loki that he should man up because he's got a hammer and he can totally take any troubles. So get your stuff together, we're going on a journey. Thor takes his traveling pack of a hammer and 2 goats. Not long after they reach Midgard and start wandering around, they come upon a small house. There's a guy standing outside and he offers them lodgings. The farmer has 2 children, Thialf and Roskva. Thialf takes Thor into the hall while Loki slaughters the goats and prepares them for food, which Thor then offers to the family that's keeping them. They all eat very, very greedily, and then Thialf breaks one of the legs to get the marrow. The next day, Thor resurrects the goats with the hammer, because that's the thing he can do now, and find one of them has a lame leg. This angers him, but the farmer, being smart, offers Thor his children as servants. Thor agrees, and off they go with 2 kids. So now Thor leaves his goats with the farmer, and continues on with Loki, his hammer, and 2 kids. They take off into the night, and they find a large hall in the forest. It is skillfully made with strong roof and broad doors. It is decorated with gold. They enter it and go to sleep. As everybody is sleeping, a strong wind starts shaking the building in the forest. They get dressed again, and inside the hall they find another small house. Thor decides to guard the house while the rest of them go inside and sleep. The next morning, Thor gets up first and goes outside and finds an enormous giant sleeping by an oak. His snoring is what's shaking the earth and the trees in the house. Thor, of course, grabs his hammer and hucks it at the giant. But the giant wakes up and startles Thor. He then heartily greets him and his companions. Thor asks who he is. The giant tells him that he is Skrimner and asks Thor where he is going. Thor replies that they want to meet the king of Utgard Loki. Skrimner tells Thor and his companions that the house they spent the night in was actually his glove, and that they are far too weak to have any business visiting the Utgard Loki, but that he is willing to help them get there. Thor accepts, and the giant ties all their provisions up in one bag. Skrimner tells them the right way, and they follow through a forest until nightfall. Skrimner selects a place for them to stay during the night and tells the other to eat while he goes and lays down. Thor then is unable to untie the bag with his provisions, and it makes him mad. His only option, of course, is to throw his hammer at the snoring giant. The hammer strikes the giant in the head, and the giant wakes up and asks if some rubbish from a tree has fallen on him, and whether Thor and his companions are full. Thor tells him that they have eaten, and he should go back to sleep. The giant falls asleep, and Thor makes another attempt to kill him. This merely wakes the giant up. The giant then returns to sleep, and at daybreak, Thor makes a third attempt to kill him with the hammer. This wakes Skrimner up again, and he explains to them that they are now close to Loki's fortress and tells them where to go. He goes north, and Thor and his companions now head towards the giant castle. Thor and his companions now approach the fortress. They find a giant gate that is locked. They are unable to open it, but they do manage to slip through the bars. They go into the hall, and Thor greets the king. Loki welcomes them and asks them where they come from, and whether any of them are good at any games or sport. In many earlier cultures, and especially in the Germanic and Nordic cultures, friendly games and sports were a way to show that each side was feeling safe with each other. They would wrestle, they would box, they would do all sorts of games like this. It was a way to show strength to each other without devolving into some kind of war that no one wanted. This then is how they fared. Loki decides to do an eating contest. An opponent, Logi, is shown to him, and they both eat meat as fast as they can. But Logi also swallows the knives, the bones, the plate, tries to bite Loki, and even eats part of the table. Loki is deemed the loser because of this, and the king asks for a better contestant. Thialf shows off his running, but is defeated by an opponent named Hugi. Thor now wants to compete. He says, let's have a drinking contest, and the king has a horn carried into the hall. Loki says that the horn is huge, and Loki says it is custom to empty the horn in one go. But Thor drinks from it 3 times. Each time he drains a large portion of it, but is unable to finish the horn. Loki then asks Thor if he can lift his cat from the ground. But Thor cannot. He can only get one of the cat's feet off the ground. The king then asks him to return to his seat and tells them that they have all been greatly humiliated. Thor, being prideful, now offers to wrestle anyone that will challenge him. The king says that he has a mother who knows how to wrestle, and sends for her. The old and large woman arrives and starts wrestling Thor. Thor can't beat her and is eventually pushed to his knee. The old woman leaves, and now Thor says he wants to go home to Asgard. The king says that he will lead them away, and explains to him the deceptions that have been going on. He is really the giant Skrimner. When he went to bed, he had sealed their bag of provisions with trickery, making it so that none could open it. He also blocked all of the hammer blows with mountains, saving himself from an inevitable death. Loki had been fighting fire in the eating contest, and the drinking horn itself had been put in the sea. Thor drank so much water from it that now Midgard had tides. The cat that Thor had tried to lift was actually the Midgard worm, or Jormungr, the worm that circles the world. And the king's mother was actually the avatar of old age. Loki then makes fun of them, curses them, and disappears. The last we see is a beaten Thor and a disappointed Loki heading back to Asgard with a pair of children. These children never really talked about again, but in the way that the Norse describe death, this means the kids never died, never aged again, and just spent the rest of eternity in Asgard as servant children. This story is mostly just a tale. It's not really here to give you any morals. It's not really here to explain anything. It's just a story of how Thor and Loki took a trip, and Thor can really kind of be a dick. The most overriding notion of it is don't try to cut off more than you can chew. Thinking you're the best is fine, but then going out and doing incredibly stupid things to prove it probably isn't in your best intentions. As you can see, it did not work out well for Thor, and it's gonna work out far less well for you because you're not a god. In the end, it just leads to disappointment, and for some, even ruination. It's one of my favorite stories, and I think it holds up well. If you would like to know more, look up Rimur, R-I-M-U-R. There you can find more about the poetic styles involved, and links to other stories. I'm Tears HTML, and this has been The Lurkrur.